Hi everyone, and let's talk today about the ethics of using the e-collar or a shock collar on a dog. As a chronically online person, I spend a lot of time on internet, and there is a very interesting drama happening right now. If you don't know, there is a person, a streamer, who was caught, supposedly, allegedly, we don't know for sure, using a shock collar on his dog while on stream. So of course people started speculating about whether he's using it or not, and even if he's not using it, what are the ethics? Some people saying that e-collars are safe. Other people started speculating what e-collars do or not. Although I'm not going to go in the whole situation and drama in detail, because that's not what we do on this channel. We're talking about dogs. But I want to take this moment and discuss the ethics of using the e-collar, discuss like what we know about e-collars, discuss whether they are good or bad, discuss the science behind that, also discuss like everything that needs to be said. And if you're a dog owner or just a person who's interested in this particular drama, I'm sure you're going to learn something interesting. And before we're going to go in there, if you don't know me, my name is Stella. I'm a dog trainer and behavior consultant in San Francisco Bay Area. I work primarily with behavior cases, which means dogs with aggression, dogs with reactivity, anxiety, and all sorts of things. So this is exactly up my valley. I often deal with dogs with difficult behavior cases. I personally never use shock collars. I advocate against them. And let's get the first thing out of the way. Are shock collars harmful? Are they dangerous? Are they bad for dogs? And I know many people, I'm sure there will be comments like that below this video. Many people will not like my answer, but unfortunately, e-collars, shock collars are harmful. This is not something that's based on my opinion or based on my ethics or based on somebody else's ethics. This is something we know for a fact. For those people who might not be as familiar for shock collars, there are different ways how we call them, how they are marketed. But in general, you have a collar that has like a little mechanism attached to it. And every time something happens or somebody pushes the button, this mechanism has two metal prongs, or sometimes they can be covered with a plastic, but it doesn't matter. There are two prongs that emit the electric shock, basically, to shock the animal. Depending on how good or bad is this collar, there are different levels of electric shock you can administer to the dog. There are collars that have a warning signal. They can beep, they can vibrate, they can flash, and all these things. No matter how we call it, we can call it e-collar, we can shock collar, we can call it correction collar. There are also some collars that are called bark collar, I don't know, correction collars. Like there are different names, but if you're curious, you can always go to the website that produces this particular collar, and you can see, how it functions. Basically, the way how it functions, it administers the electric shock that serves as a punishment. So whatever the dog did before that or is doing in the moment, the dog gets shocked. So in order for them to stop doing it or be afraid of a shock collar and avoid doing this. The classic shock collar is something that is attached to the dog, and then the person has a button in their hand, like a remote where they can push the button and administer the dog. There are also other variations. For example, I mentioned the bark collar. Every time the dog barks, the shock is administered immediately without somebody pushing the button. There are also electric fences. It can be a GPS, so if the dog goes far away from the house, the shock gets administered as soon as they go further away. Or sometimes it can be particular perimeter. So let's say you want your dog to stay in a particular part of the house. You can put like a electric wire. So as soon as the dog crossing this wire, the shock gets administered. It's important to understand, no matter what people claim, no matter what marketing says, in order for this collar to work and to do whatever it's intended, to serve the purpose why people even buy them in the first place, it has to emit a certain level of electric shock that is painful for the dog. And the reason the dog stops doing what they're doing or avoids doing what they're not supposed to do, because they don't want to be in pain, they don't want to be in discomfort. If you ever by accident shocked yourself, maybe as a child, I don't know, I did this stupidity as a child. I had a metal scissors that we stuck in a socket, and that was not very pleasant. And there are other ways where people can by accident shock themselves. If you ever did it, it's very unpleasant. Also, I actually will link this channel in the description. There is a channel about electric fences, and the guy actually puts a collar on himself and shocks himself.
Alrighty, here goes nothing. I am testing them from the dog's perspective, so that's what I'm here to do. I already know it hurts pretty bad. This is on the medium setting here, so let's see how it feels. Oh, there it is. Oh, yep. Oh, yep. That's just the medium setting. Should I try it one more time just to be fun? No, I think I might be good on that. And, if you are using them on your dog, I think that's something to keep in mind. It's definitely not a pleasant experience whatsoever.
And he tells you how unpleasant it is. So there is no question that, it's not painful. It's not what people think, because if it was not painful, it would not serve its purpose, because the purpose is to punish the dog for wrong behavior. And if it wasn't painful, it would not be successful. It would not solve the person. People would simply not use it. There is also something that about this particular case arises where a person says, I use this collar, but I don't use shock, I use vibration. We're going to discuss it in a bit later. Let's focus on the shocking part. So how do we know that shock collars are bad for dogs, and why many modern, progressive, the trainers who have latest education, who spend time on educating themselves about animal ethology, about deeper understanding of animal learning and stuff like this, why these trainers usually advocate against shock collars. We know it's painful, but we also have plenty of research that shows that prolonged exposure to shock, or a regular exposure to electric shock, causes lots of bad consequences. There is plenty of research that shows us that the long-term consequences of using shock collar is that the dog may develop aggression. Sometimes this can be aggression towards the owner. Dogs may also develop all sorts of stress, anxiety-related disorders. Some of the dogs that were exposed to shock collar for a prolonged time, you can even see it in their body posture. They're very tense because they constantly expecting something to shock them, so they're very tense, they're not very relaxed, and this will also cause different health and mental issues for a dog. And I guess this will be a good time to tell you about the official statement of American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. So these are actually people who are experts not only in the veterinary subjects, such as health of your animal, but also in the animal behavior, means dealing with animals with complicated, challenging behaviors. I'm not going to read you the whole statement. You can find it online. I will link in the description, but here are the most important things that they state. Aversive methods, included by not limited to electronic collars, as well as prong collars, choke chains, leash corrections, and other forms of physical and psychological punishment, should not be used under any circumstances. To avoid any misunderstanding, we emphasize that American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior does not support the use of aversives in any context, regardless of the tools used or the trainer's level of experience. This is actually something we're going to cover later, because many trainers say, if you know how to use ecollar, it's not damaging. As you can see, it is damaging no matter the other tools used or no matter the level of the experience of the person using it. They also say that our position is grounded in current scientific evidence, which consistently shows that aversive methods carry significant risk to animal welfare and the human-animal bond, and that their reward-based methods are both safer and more effective. So there is not only the risk to animal welfare, as I just mentioned a second ago, but also something that I didn't mention, that you are definitely risking ruining the bond that you have with your dog. And I actually had seen clients where dogs who came from the board and training facility, they were using shock collars on those dogs acted completely different. And people regretted sending their dogs to those facilities. But this is another conversation for another time. And also important thing, as they claim, their reward-based methods are both safer and more effective based on current scientific evidence. So again, if somebody says that ecollar shock collars are more efficient, are better, are safe, this is not true. When I say this, I understand that some people are very worried about animals and animal welfare, while other people see the dog just as a property, as just an accessory to them. They assume the dog's supposed to just obey, submit, and whatnot. So obviously depends on each person's values. Whatever I say right now might be important for people or not. That's why this debate about shock collars is always complicated, because if we come from different understanding, we will never agree. But no matter their values, no matter of our positions, we know that the dogs get bad consequences when they experience shock on a regular level. So if somebody uses a shock one time, once a year, this will probably not do do any major harm. But hey guys, editing Stella here. Let me insert myself here for a moment because I said something and I didn't elaborate on it later in the video, and this is really important. So basically, I just said in this video that if you only use the shock collar once in a year, it will not create any major harm. And this is something that is consistent with the research. And this is also something that some of the companies who produce e-collars or some trainers who heavily rely on e-collars and suggest clients to use e-collars, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna have a dog, they're gonna put a shock collar on a dog, they're gonna shock the dog and say, you see, nothing happens to your dog is okay, they're fine. Or also sometimes people who want to push for e-collars, they would do a very badly designed research showing like, oh look, we took 10 dogs, we shocked them, nothing happened to those dogs. So why would you even say that it's harmful? Again, this is something that's important. If, let's say, you are a dog owner, maybe you used the shock collar once, maybe you went to the training session where the trainer showed the e-collar and kind of tried to persuade that this is not harmful. Yes, there will be no, in most cases, there will be no major harm happen from one time or once in a year using a shock collar. We're talking primarily about a regular use and that a regular exposure will do a major harm. But the problem is that even if you go into shock collar training with the idea like, oh, I'm only going to use it sometimes as an emergency, unfortunately, something about humans that we know as soon as we get a tool in our hand where we can push a button to control something, we will more likely use it. And this is something that I cover in the future. So even if you go into the e-collar training with an open mind, not thinking to use it on a regular basis, unfortunately, based on the research, we can see also based on the situation we just discussed that prompted this discussion in general. The person, when he came out discussing the situation, he said he doesn't even use shock collar, he has it on the dog, but he only uses vibration. I will cover it a bit later. So again, this is another case when we say we're not going to do something or we don't even plan to do something, but in a moment where something happens with us, we're heated, we may still use it. So 2 things I want you to remember. So if somebody uses the shock collar once and shows you this as a proof that nothing happens to the dog, unfortunately it will happen, and the longer you use the shock collar. And the second thing, even if you as an owner don't intend to use a shock collar, but you do put a shock collar on your dog, unfortunately you will use it more than you intend or that you even personally want to use it. Unfortunately, the way how humans are, if your dog is in a shock collar, there is more likely a chance that you're going to use the shock collar, and when you're pissed with your dog, when your dog doesn't do what you want them to do, every time you're experiencing bad day or something like this is something about us human, we're more likely to use it. And also there is something about the punishment, why modern dog training advocates against the punishment. There is something about it that if I yelled at the dog and my dog listened, next time I'm going to yell harder. If I physically abused my dog or I pushed the shock collar and something, happened what I wanted my dog to happen, next time I will rely on this tool instead of actually teaching my dog what to do, instead of taking time to figure out why my dog is not listening to me, stuff like that. But also when we go back to a scientific part of it, if we need additional proof why we know that the shock is not very good for animals. We humans, we do lots of research on animals. I'm not talking about dogs right now, but different animals. We did lots of crazy research in the last century on animals. Some of this research is done for medical purposes. Some of the research is done to study the human psychology, the animal psychology, all sorts of things. So as horrible as it sounds, that research gave us lots of science that we use now in medicine and treating humans and stuff like this. And there are lots of experiments that were done on animals that would involve electric shock. There were many of similar experiments where if we need to apply something negative to the animal and see how the animal would react in order for us to study how their brain changes, what neurons are firing, what the behavior would be. So in order to give our animal something negative and then study whatever happens in their body, we administer the shock. And since we have many research involving shocking the animals, we also have direct and indirect data what happens to the animal, and we have lots of data showing that exposure to electric shock causes harm. It causes harms on the physical level, it causes harm on a mental level, and stuff like this. So there is no reason for us to think that we don't have enough information to say that shock collars are bad. The common argument when we have about the shock collar is that if they're used correctly, if they're used appropriately, if they're used in the right moment, they're actually very efficient and they're not so bad. So let's unpack this. First of all, a person who is a professional trainer who relies on many professional tools, not only on shock collars, but many professional tools, who understands deeply the animal psychology, what are the actual needs, what is appropriate, not appropriate behavior for this particular animal. We can assume that these people will not misuse the shock collar. This person would rarely rely on shock collar. Also, we can assume that there will be less harm done to the animal because the person will use it correctly. But unfortunately, when the same trainers with a huge amount of followers who show shock collars, who show how they suggest usage of the shock collar to the regular dog owner, suggest using shock collar in situation when you can actually train the dog using non-harmful ways, so there is no need to use a shock collar. When these people have no experience in dog training, who don't understand even the basic of understanding the dog body language, understanding when the dog is afraid, understanding why his dog is not listening in the moment, people who never even spend a good amount of time on proper dog training and then go away, just purchase shock collar and use it, this is not a good thing. And unfortunately, when trainers use it and advocate or showcase using them, this will actually just creates this a false narrative that shock collars are not bad. If used correctly, they're not harmful, but it doesn't matter how you use them. If you use them and shock your dog, they will be harmful no matter what. Also, there are good articles that were written in not magazines, journals that are intended for pet professionals that in detail study the cases. The dog was, for example, administered a shock from a shock collar, and as a result, the dog beat or severely injured the owner or a child or a person who was passing by. So having a dog experiencing aggression spurts while on a shock collar is not uncommon. There is also a misconception when people say oh, but there are those cases when the dog is in very difficult behavior cases where shock collar is a last resort. Again, the shock collar is never a last resort. It's just a marketing plot by people who produce shock collars or by certain trainers who choose to use shock collars. As I said, I'm a behavior consultant and dog trainer who works with aggression and reactivity cases, and I can tell you that I don't use shock collars in my practice, and I don't see other dog trainers, a fellow behavior specialist or veterinary behaviorist, anyone saying that, oh yeah, the shock collar is the last resort. That's usually not the case. And editing still here again, I think I didn't address enough the point why I believe, and other professionals in my area believe, that shock collars are not only not the tool in general, but also not that last resort tool that the internet claims it to be. So let me try to address it here as good as I can. So the biggest, issue with dogs from us dog owners is when the dog bites the person, because most dogs who are surrendered to the shelter, they are being surrendered after they bite somebody or after they attack the dog owner and stuff like this. These are one of the most common cases besides the separation anxiety. So let's say we say, oh, the dog has aggression towards humans, and this is very dangerous, very scary. So how about we use a shock collar to make a guaranteed success that the dog doesn't bite anyone else? But as I mentioned before, there are studies, there is research that shows that administering electric shock will increase the aggression behavior. So in this case, if you are trying to fix aggression with aggression, this will probably not work, and I would tell you it will probably backfire. Since aggression is one of the biggest cases and we are not recommended to use any aversive tools, including a shock collar, okay, so this is not last resort for aggression cases. What are the other cases? As I mentioned, people also often surrender dogs when they have separation anxiety, which means when people leave the house and leave the dog at home alone, the dog starts crying, screaming, barking, sometimes destroying the furniture, destroying the house, peeing, defecating everywhere, and stuff like that. And although some people might say that, oh, the dog is just doing this to piss me off and stuff like this, unfortunately, this is not true. I say unfortunately because it would be easy if that was the true. The reason why your dog does it, because the dog is either untrained to stay alone or for some reason has such a severe level of anxiety being left alone, being away from whoever they consider they're like a safe person. So they freak out, they go in a full anxiety, panic mode, and the results of this huge levels of stress, anxiety, and so on is defecating, destroying things. Sometimes it's self-harm. The dogs do self-mutilating and stuff like this. So if we talk about the dog who is in a major stress and a major anxiety, and we put a shock collar on this dog, and we know that exposure to shock, let's say we put a bar collar, exposure to shock leads to increased anxiety in dogs. So basically, again, we're trying to fix anxiety with more anxiety. Will it work? This will not work long term. In long term, your dog going to develop more issues. So instead of addressing the actual issue, we just use, hello, sir. So instead of addressing the actual issue, we just try to suppress it by using a punishment. It's like saying like, okay, let's say I have a child who has a certain problem, and I say, how about I use some medieval torture tools on them because I don't like them being in whatever state of mind they are. What are other reasons people use a shock collar? I just have a list that's based on different research. For example, a recall problem. So people say to improve their recall, I'm going to use a shock collar. But you have to understand that the issues with recall usually lays in two things. First, your relationship with the dog, how much the dog enjoys coming back to you, how much they enjoy spending time with you outside, and also just the training. Because what often happens, we don't really practice recall outside of the house. We just take the dog outside, we unleash them, and some dogs come to you, some dogs not. In case if you're in a dog park and you're trying to call your dog to you to leave the place and your dog doesn't want to come to you, this is definitely something that happens between you and your dog in terms of relationship, why they don't want to come to you. In this case, we can fix it with a little bit of training, but if you use a shock collar to shock your dog for misbehaving, so basically you already have issues in the relationship with your dog, in your bond, and you're just making so basically every time your dog has to interact with you, they have to be administered a shock. So you're definitely not improving this relationship with you. And other cases when dogs can have issues with recall, where their motivation to chase the wildlife, the motivation to play with dogs is greater than coming to you, which means maybe you don't take your dog out to the dog park enough. Maybe, again, I'm not saying that's what happens in your case, but sometimes. Also, sometimes some dogs can get so excited about seeing their dog friends, they can get so riled up that they just can't stop playing. So in this case, you can do a little bit of training on impulse control, training on, ignoring the distractions, ignoring things that dogs wants to chase and stuff like this. Again, it can be done without a shock collar. Other reasons when people use a shock collar, sometimes it's pulling on the leash, and pulling on the leash is usually one of the easiest things to solve if you actually commit to training. Yes, it can be tricky for a person who never did a training before. Sometimes it can be tricky because the advice on the internet is very different. So different people suggest you different things. And sometimes if you don't understand the reason why your dog is pulling, I even have the whole video about that, you might not fix it in the right way. So it's actually can be fixed and you don't need a shock collar for that. But sometimes, again, people feel like I need to use shock collar. For example, let's say I deal with a dog who is very easily excitable. When I walk them, when they see something in the environment, they want to run there, they want to explore it, they want to say hi to everyone. And if I shock them every time they see a person, they want to say hi, or every time they want to jump at another dog and I shock them. Again, what we can end up long term, the dog gonna start associating that every time I see a person, every time I see something else in the environment, I get punished for seeing this, because the dog doesn't understand that you punish them for just pulling. So they're gonna start associating seeing those things with the pain they receive from a shock collar. So eventually the dog might become more reactive towards people, more reactive toward dogs and stuff like this. So I mean, I have the whole list why people use shock collar, but if I analyze every single detail, I can give you 20 different reasons why this is usually not the best solution. And as I said, long term, it's very harmful and it's going to produce results that you would regret eventually. Okay, so we covered that there is no correct way to use a shock collar without causing harm. They will always cause harm to your animal. And basically, this is the ethical decision that every dog trainer makes, whether you want to cause harm to the animal or not. Unfortunately, there are some people who may believe that they are magical unicorns, that somehow when they do it, it will not cause harm to their dog. But again, it's up to them. I'm not going to continue on this topic. As I said, it's just ethical decision how we treat our animal. But here I want to cover a little bit on this, like, again, another common how to say, like a loophole or a trap that people get themselves into when they say, and this is what exactly, as far as I understand, happened in this case, when the person said, yes, my dog has this type of a collar, but I don't really use the shock collar, I just use the vibration, in case if you're not familiar with the situation. But anyway, I will just describe it. So basically what happens, the person is on a stream, he's behind his computer talking to his audience, the dog is on a dog bed or actually on a dog cot in the same room, in the same vicinity to the person, and then the dog gets up.
Oh, but just stop.
I guess the person gets annoyed that the dog got up. I don't know what was the situation, why that was annoying for that person. At some point, you can see the dog is trying to get off the bed. And you can see the dog is like hesitating to get off the bed. So the dog definitely understands that getting off bed is not appropriate in this situation. And then there is a moment when the dog, the front paw reaches the floor, the dog yelps and gets back to the bed. Also, if you watch this video in slow motion, you can see that the person is actually reaching with a hand. We don't see what this hand is doing, but we see the person reaching for something. So if we believe the common allegation or whatever, like common speculation, that at that moment the person reached to push the button on the collar, and that's why the dog yelped. So if we assume the person used a shock collar, yeah, that probably indicates the person used a certain level of the shock that was very painful and hurtful for the dog. That's why the dog yelped, and the dog immediately went back to the bed because the dog understands. So this means this was not the first time. Because if it would happened the first time and the dog just freaked out, the dog would probably run away or starts like running and like kind of freaking out. But the fact that the dog went back to the bed and immediately took the down position and didn't move any further, didn't flinch any further, that means this happened to dog multiple times before. It's a habit, and dog exactly knows what will be the consequence of this situation. Or I think the person themselves, they came out the next day, said only the vibration was used. In this case, we can, I don't know, like we can also speculate that the dog was just startled. That's why they yelled. But most probably, whatever was administered to the dog has to be harsh enough for the dog to yelp. If the dog was just startled, they might like jump off, or like, if you are a dog owner, you can tell, like, sometimes when dogs get startled, they can do weird moves. So we don't know what happened there. We were not there. We don't know if the person, obviously there is a huge consequence now when there is so much backlash for the person to admitting what they were doing. There can be also a mistake when the person thinks that they didn't administer the shock, but the shock was administered, because the shock collar can malfunction, or maybe they were thinking they have a certain setting off, but the setting is not off. So there are so many things that can happen. I don't want to go into like snarky speculation what can happen in there. But again, this is the reason why we don't want people to use shock collars, because even if the person says, I'm only using on a low level, I'm only using the vibration, and I'm only like using it once a year, what can happen that in a spur of a moment, you can push the button, because that's how we humans are. If we have something in our hand, we're going to push that button. If we do have this button to push, we will push it. And then if there is any malfunction in the device, or we're told the setting was low, but the setting was high, this is what will happen. So the question in the situation, like, was it necessary in this situation to shock the dog? Can we train the dog to stay, I guess suppose the situation was the dog didn't want to stay in bed. Can we make the dog stay in bed without a shock collar? Absolutely. This is the reason why we don't want dogs to wear shock collar. You become too comfortable as a dog owner using shock collar for things that can be trained without any force, without any producing harm to your dog, without doing anything. So many of my clients work from home. And this can be a serious issue if you work from home and you're like on Zoom calls, or you have to work at your computer, you have a busy work day, maybe you have like calls to your clients, I don't know, whatever you have. It may be hard for you to focus on your work when your dog is constantly bugging you, like running around, doing something, I don't know, maybe like even running around the house, chewing on furniture, whatever. People have issues with their dogs. But it is absolutely possible to teach their dog to stay in their spot, chill while you're focusing on your work. For this behavior, no matter how hyperactive, hyper energy your dog is, the solution may be more complicated, but in general, you don't need to use any harsh tools. You don't need to use any punishment. You don't need to use any aversive tools to teach your dog to just chill during the day. That is quite normal. If you provide the needs for the dog, if the dog gets walked twice a day, like if you have a hyper energy dog, you definitely make sure you walk them for at least an hour in the morning before you start your work. And then especially if you work from home, you can probably take a lunch break, take them for another like midday break. You can spend time training your dog. You can spend time playing with your dog or any other social interaction that will give the outlet for their mental, physical, whatever other energy exhaustion. If you provide the dog their needs, in normal situation, the dog would not bug you all day long. Sometimes they bug you because their needs are not provided. They're just simply bored, like a child would be that sits at home, has nothing to do. Or sometimes they would bug you if you don't have clear routine or if you don't set boundaries. For example, like if I'm sitting on a chair working on my laptop and my dog walks up to me like with a toy, if I have time to play, I may play, but sometimes I may say like, hey, I don't have time. Average dog, if they were raised properly, trained properly, they understand, the same as humans. They understand like, oh yeah, my owner is busy right now. And if your dog doesn't understand it, that means you accidentally reinforce them not understanding, basically, because that's what happens. For example, the person sits at the computer, the dog bugs them, brings the toys, pokes them, jumps at them, and eventually a person is like, okay, let me play with you. So what the dog learns, like if I bug long enough, I will get what I want. So in this case, me as a trainer, if I come in, I will have to, obviously analyze your situation and tell you like, yeah, you accidentally reinforce your dog for actually disturbing you during your workday. We're gonna teach the dog to relax and chill. We teach the dog impulse control if they want something, but they can't get it in the moment, so they can deal with their frustration. We teach the dog that sometimes we do play with them, sometimes we don't, and we teach the dog how to deal with this type of like disappointment, not to go into details. So it is absolutely possible to teach your dog to chill and relax during the day. You don't need a shock collar for that. And as I said, even if the argument is I only use the vibration, no, unfortunately, as a dog trainer, I can tell you people say one thing, but secretly they use another thing. And also sometimes people don't want to harm their dog, but by accident they do because they get angry, they get frustrated, they're trying to get the dog to do what they want. They, like they have a bad day, they're tired, they're distracted. Most of us, at least sometimes, we yell at our partners. Some people would yell at their kids, and it's not doesn't make you a horrible person when sometimes you just snap at somebody. It probably makes you a horrible person if you do it all the time, if you don't take time to take accountability, apologize, make up for that and stuff like this. And the same for dogs. I believe that's okay, that sometimes we can be pissed with our dogs, but what is not okay when we lash out at our dog, and especially when we have a powerful tool in our hands, something as a shock that is very hurtful and very damaging. And again, if somebody says like, I only use vibration collar, my question is like, why use it in the first place? And there is a last thing I want to address. There is lots of talk about this regarding this particular person, that they're animal abuser, they're like horrible person, they should be this, they should be that. I have to tell you, as a dog trainer and dog professional, sometimes we do things to our animals even if we love them very much. The same way we can love our partner, but we can accidentally say or do something harmful, something that we did not intend. And it's very important to have a clear understanding when somebody intends to do animal abuse, when they harm animals, when they neglect animals, don't feed them, keep them caged all day long, when they maliciously physically or somehow else abuse the animal, and somebody that does something without understanding. Again, this is not me excusing the person. I believe that we as humans, especially that particular person seems to be progressive enough, we have to do better. Obviously, not understanding that we are doing some kind of abuse is actually not an excuse. But I also want people not to dogpile on somebody. I'm sure maybe in your wider circle of acquaintance, friends, relative, colleagues, you probably have somebody who else uses such tools as shock collars, or even to go further, using things as sleep leads, choke chains, prong collars, and other tools that are also considered non-ethical and non-humane. Most of the time when people use it, they don't have malicious intent. They either were misinformed, because unfortunately in America, the shock collars are not banned. We have like a list of countries, like in Germany and some other countries. I will actually add the list of countries on the screen. The shock collars are banned. They're not being used in the police. They're not being used with service dogs. They're not being used with military dogs and stuff like that. And those dogs are successfully being trained without all that, which gives you a lot of information. If a professional dog, professional service dog can be trained without a shock collar, why would a random dog owner need a shock collar? But this is for another debate. Yeah, so we have to do better, but unfortunately sometimes we can be misinformed, because I'm sure that person probably hired a trainer who suggested usage of this thing, or maybe he found some videos online and YouTube some videos, and he showed some very successful, very popular YouTube or whatever TikTok trainers who are using those things, and he assumed like, oh, if those people are using, that's probably nothing bad about it. There is also a conversation about people thinking that dogs should submit, and dogs, if you don't use like punishment on them, they're going to immediately misbehave. But I have to tell you that having a obedient dog has nothing to do with punishment. You can have a perfectly obedient the dog that listens to your every word, does everything for you without using a single punishment. That can be done. And every time when I hear people saying like, oh yeah, those people who don't use punishment, their dogs are just so misobedient, this is crazy. I can, for example, give you like a simple example. I can leave a piece of steak on the table in the living room and leave the house completely, and my dog will not take the piece of steak. And my dog doesn't have a shock collar, doesn't have a prong collar, is not being punished severely for that. It's just being trained to have a certain boundary with food. Again, not every dog can be trained, because some dogs has a little bit of more motivation towards food, but some basic boundaries with food you can teach. And the reason I give food as example, because if you're a dog owner, you know how hard it is for most dogs to resist a piece of steak on the table if you leave them in the room with the steak. So just to circle back, we may still be a good pet parent in general. We may still very love our dogs and use shock collar. The reason why sometimes people use shock collars is because they feel their training is failing, they feel like nothing works, or I need a specific behavior from my dog, but it's not happening, so I'm going to utilize the shock collar to have a effective submission from the dog. But you have to understand that unfortunately the downside outweighs the efficiency, and also since you can get there using different methods, why utilize something harmful. I'm almost done with this video, just a little bit, few more minutes left. But since I said a lot, let me just be abundantly clear, because I didn't make it clear in my video. If you are using or you used in the past any aversive tools, including a shock collar, it doesn't make you a bad person if you were not aware of the consequences. If your trainer told you, oh, that's fine. But what you can do now, you can stop using it now. You can hire a trainer that's going to solve the issue if you still have issues with your dog, or you can find solutions on the internet to train your dog to behave without the need of you to constantly punish and shock your dog. If you really love your dog, if you want your dog to be healthy, to be happy, to enjoy life in your house, you can always choose to do better. Now, since you know what you know after watching this video, you can no longer just use a shock collar and think that it's okay. Using a shock collar is not humane. So do better for your dog. And if you don't want harmful things to happen to your dog, stop using it. But again, you may be a dog owner who uses shock collar, who is listening to me and says like, oh no, she's wrong because I was told by somebody the shock collars are not so bad. I encourage you to do your research. If you like evidence-based approach, look at the studies, look at the information that we have. I will link as much as possible down in the description. If you use the shock collar and you were thinking like, oh, but this is proven to be very efficient to me, and what I would just in general encourage you, look on the other side, do your research, check the information, check the downsides of using the shock collar, and maybe consider other things. Especially I would encourage you because many people say that a shock collar is a very efficient tool, while at the same simultaneously they had shock collar for a while and the dog still has behavior issues. So you have to ask yourself, if my dog still has behavior issues, but I'm using this a highly efficient tool, what am I even doing? You know, maybe that's not the most efficient tool in the first place. If shock collars solve certain behavior issues for you, sometimes maybe you can just stop using it. You don't need to use it if the behavior issues are solved while you're still using it. Or also sometimes if you notice that your dog has changed, they're not the same as they were before, there is something about the dog they are having now more like anxious, avoidant personality, you can definitely explain this by the dog being administered shock way too often. So now they're a little bit tense and a little bit unsatisfied, unrelaxed, and it's hard for them to enjoy their life full because they know that anytime they do something wrong, they will be shocked. So maybe that's a way for you if you really love your dog, if you want the best for your dog, and just listen to research, listen to data that says that it will unfortunately generate a chronic stress, anxiety, and all sorts of physical and mental problems for your dog long term. So if you can stop it right now, do it and advocate for your dog and be a better person for your dog. And if you're interested in your dog related content, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next video. If you have any questions regarding the dog issues, leave them in the comments and I will try to answer them in the next videos. Bye bye.
Sunlight.